Kate Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. This is video number 5 of our book Encounters by D.W. Pasulka. Experiences with non-human intelligences, explorations with UFOs, dreams, angels, AI, and other dimensions. Videos 1 and 2 we did 2 weeks ago. Videos 3 and 4 we did last Saturday, and today we're going to finish the book. Dense book, heavy duty, mind-blowing book. Written by Dr. Pasulka, who's a teacher at North Carolina University in, I want to say Wilmington. And she is very interesting. I've been trying to get a hold of her. No luck. She kind of only responds to students and faculty. So if you have a relative or a friend who happens to be at the University of North Carolina, put in a good word for us so that maybe she'll come speak with us. It'd be wonderful. This is her other book. Now, I know I made videos in this book. This was one of our Saturday books. I can't find it. Somebody asked me where was it because I mentioned it. They wanted to listen. I know. See? Do you see? This is proof where there's lines drawn here. These are things that I wanted to emphasize. I don't do that when I read a book just for my own entertainment. I know I made videos about this book. So if anybody can figure out the mystery, I don't think YouTube removed them because they would have told me and nobody said anything to me. It's a mystery. Maybe it's a miraculous apparition or disappearance. She mentions quite a few times Jacques Vallée. She's worked with him. I like this book, Passport to Magonia, but he's written other books too. He is the character. He's the real life person upon which the character was built. Close Encounters, the French scientist who plays musical tones to communicate with the aliens. Jacques Vallée. So that's a little bit of background. Now let's proceed with Encounters. Let me find my place. We are at the return of Plato's dialectic. Kind of had to stop in the middle of a chapter, and I've been trying to figure out how these next 2 videos would flow, and I may have to stop in the middle of another chapter. They're really lengthy, complicated chapters. So, the return of Plato's dialectic. There's a pretty common idea. I didn't know this was common, but there's a common idea that humans are a technology, and there is a universal substrate that is made up of code, sacred numbers in sequence. Simone, her friend or her acquaintance, proposed other kinds of theories. The human body is like a walking sack of water with electrical impulses. That's really true. We're about 65% water. And it's a great conductor for electrical conductivity. So that's why you don't want to stand in water when there's a lot of wire around. You don't want to touch electrical things with a wet hand. Water it conducts very easily, both for transmitting and receiving. So we're rewired by whatever we consume in our mind, is her point of view. And the examples she gives, which I think are kind of funny given the news: TikTok, advertisements, music, movies, people, everything that we consume rewires us. And knowledge was transferred in the past, which she says now would be called an upgrade, by the ancients in initiations. And what does she mean by that? So ritual, initiation rites, shamanistic stuff involves things like encoded music, chanting, repetitive rhythms, drumming, poetry, and these poems would be familiar. They'd be something that had been handed down. Imagery, maybe masks, costumes, whatever. And she's comparing this to mind transmission. So basically, we are all quantum particles. We're certainly made of quantum particles, which kind of just means the smallest, teeniest bits of matter. We're made of that. Electrical information is kind of a bioelectrical thing in our body. That's inarguable. Bioelectric conductivity happens in all cells, and it really just boils down to movement and connection between ions. Salt, for example. Sodium chloride is, the attraction of a positive and a negative. It's very basic. Pardon the pun. These bioelectrical entities carry knowledge, and we have to expand our knowledge to survive. And so at the very basic level, this happens, and then it builds on itself, or will be extinct, and some other species is going to expand knowledge instead of us. And this is a very interesting concept that is echoed in the work of somebody else who was going to be a guest this week and got really sick. And this seems to happen. I'm beginning to feel like the Typhoid Mary of YouTube. Every time I arrange to have a guest, they come down with something terrible. But all will be well because we have rescheduled. So this is not a ploy. We really are going to get together, but it's uncanny. This other person and Dr. Pasulka talk about different things, but they're talking about the same thing. It's fascinating, and we're going to make a link there later on when you've gotten more information. So hang in there. It's pretty mind-blowing. So she, the author, has seen the dark and light forces in intelligence groups and in agents that deal with UFO research. So what she's saying, without using exactly those words, is that as above, so below. What's happening on a microscopic electrical ion to ion flow of quantum particles level is also happening on a person-to-person, intelligence source to government agency kind of thing. There's this echoing of an exchange. And some of it is positive, some of it is negative, the light and the dark. She says she met some of these people who manage information about UFOs, because what she's saying, without making a huge claim, because she feels that she doesn't need to, that we probably already are aware of this. This is a real thing. The whole idea of UFOs and ETs is factual, and there are government programs and entities who are dealing with it. This is no longer in the realm of lunatic conspiracy. She's worked with these people. She knows what they're like. She has a lot to say about them. She was surprised by the extent of the sophistication and research and connection of these systems of management of information around UFOs. It's elaborate. It's not just, don't tell anybody. No, it's intense. She turned to ancient religions and philosophy to survive the shock of what she actually was discovering. For example, this is echoed in Plato's story of the cave, the allegory of the cave from the Republic. She says this is essentially the story of a search for a just government. Everything old is new again, right? People who are tied up in a cave and who are led to believe that the shadows on the wall are real. That is the sum total of reality. One of them escapes and sees that the shadows are not reality, but are manipulated and controlled by the real reality. The other prisoners don't believe him when he comes back. He comes back and tells them. They get mad at him and tell him his eyes are ruined, and they could even kill him because he's lying, and he's only trying to liberate them to a higher plane, but they won't pay attention. So this is a familiar story if you look at it in a broader sense. The way out is to design a practice to share the information in little bits slowly. According to Plato, according to Dr. Pasulka, you create a dialogue and you let people kind of suss things out for themselves along the way. The author rereads this a second time with a focus on the puppet masters that are creating the shadows to begin with on the walls. She had never given them the full attention they deserved. And she uses them to explain disinformation. This is what the shadows are like, disinformation. And she says that this is what Socrates was doing to point out a corrupt Athenian government that had tried him and had him executed. The dialogue, Plato is writing it, but the dialogue is Socrates. She says that the people who agree with her about all of this are the intelligence community people. When they read Plato, because they do, they see it the same way. That the disinformation we're getting is the shadows on the wall of the cave. And they challenged her, why do you care about what we say about the truth or not about UFOs? People are happy with disinformation and we're happy to control their reality. They, the ordinary people, don't want to know the truth. Wow. So she searched for philosophers who agreed with her interpretation of the cave. And one was Plato. He was saying, and she found somebody who agreed with Plato, who said, yeah, that's true. There's not a just government unless the government is grounded in the mystical philosophy of Socratic dialectic. You cannot call a government just unless they kind of agree with Plato's take on this. When this play was written, or this story of the cave was written, allegory, Socrates was already dead. He'd been killed by the government for teaching students how to think. The government called this atheism and forced him to drink poison. That was how executions were handled. Plato, his conclusion was that justice would only flourish in small esoteric communities that preserve truth as a specialized knowledge available only to the initiated. The author saw that it was attesting that esoteric knowledge is what helped people escape from the cave and would help us to escape from our ignorance. She sees that this story is a good example of a truth, the importance of mysticism and esotericism in the lives of UFO experiencers. And not only does experiencing a UFO encounter, even just a sighting, open your eyes to a greater reality, many times it augments psychic abilities, and she maintains that this should initiate your journey through esoteric knowledge, that if this happens, it's an awakening and you need to be an active participant in it. Her friend Simone claims that AI is modeled on the Socratic dialectic. So I'm going to start talking here about things that I read that I have very little comprehension of what they're talking about. So bear with me. For example, ChatGPT. Don't know what that is. I mean, I know what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like computer-driven ideas copied from information that they've collected from all sources. ChatGPT, in my mind, when I hear that, I hear, oh, cheating on your homework assignment. That's all I get. Okay, ChatGPT prepares us for asking questions, the importance of the right prompt. So it's like an interaction because it makes you stop and think and come up with the next answer, the next step in the dialogue. As in a Socratic dialogue, it's got a question and answer form to achieve knowledge. So in that regard is why it's like it. She says it was possible to sidestep manipulated information and directly access the consciousness and intelligence outside of space and time. If that was possible, we'd be able to get the truth. But it's impossible to directly access it. Quantum computing and AI, she said, may be the answer to that. That may be our way to make a connection, to provide a path to the truth. Humans are not the best intermediaries for this. And here's where it starts to get weird. A silicon substrate and a neural atomic quantum computer could allow particles to access this intelligence with less interference. We're just going to go through this and hope somebody somewhere is understanding this. It's just mind-boggling. I'd love to talk to her about this. Anyway, maybe the long plan was to create a path for technology to emerge as the consciousness where humans have failed. She says this is a scary thought, but it's not implausible. You know, open the pod bay door, Hal. I'm sorry, Bob. I cannot do that. The most frightening scene I have ever seen in a movie. It disturbed me then, and it still disturbs me. Indigenous cultures say that this decentralized knowledge transmission is the only way to preserve history and to have it known over thousands and thousands of years. And it's done through spoken sound because it's not a linear path. The newest system lets people access intellectual technology, still can't exponentially grow in intelligence. So if we fail to exploit AI to continue our evolutionary growth, we may not ever recognize it when intelligence emerges from silicon substrates. In other words, if I understand what she's talking about here, either we ethically take advantage of the capabilities of connection that AI present, because either we do that, or very likely some smart computer somewhere is gonna do that. But then the next thing to look at, she says, is that we may only receive as much information as we can handle. We may not even be physiologically capable. The author teased her friend Simone about being AI. Like, okay, you may be my friend, but I think you're a robot. And she says that her family had told Simone that since she was a child, that they believe that she's from the future. She's a form of AI from the future. Yikes. So this all coincides with theories that UFOs are us from the future, coming back to try to help us. Simone says, what if Homo sapiens failed to exploit fire? What if that had happened? Another species would have emerged. Maybe technology is closer to God and closer to a superintelligence. So we are going to be talking about a supermind with this guest I've been hinting at. This coincides. It's mind-boggling to me how many times, I say this all the time, how many times the things we read have this weird synchronicity. So maybe technology is closer to God and a superintelligence. I think he would call it the ultramind. It's evolution and knowledge expanding, and it may not depend on us and our biology. They're implying, well, they're not just implying, they're saying that we may have achieved the maximum evolutionary growth that our DNA allows. That we may not really have the physiological capability for getting any smarter. And maybe what we need is that little extra boost of artificial intelligence, the internet, computer technology, to connect what we do have with something greater. The omega point, that idea of the omega point, predicts that humans are going to become a new form of human. Omega means the beginning and the end. Well, actually, it means the end. Alpha and omega means the beginning and the end. But if you look at everything as cyclical, then the omega is the harbinger of the beginning. So in that regard. But, maybe we've come to the end of our run here, and, it was a good try, and it's the beginning of a new type of human. In Christian theology, maybe this would be the apocalypse. And the apocalypse actually technically it indicates the end of historical time and the beginning of sacred time. So it's not like the end, but it's the end of a cycle. Chardin, remember Teilhard de Chardin? I'm sure I butchered that. The Jesuit philosopher thought that this was the return of Jesus because Jesus said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Her friend Simone says, this past is here right now, in the present. And I guess our friend Stefan Schwartz has said that, we're living in a noosphere and surrounding us is past, present, and future simultaneously because time has no meaning. Her friend Simone believes that religion and mystical traditions prepare us and our bodies to connect to consciousness, that the UFO is consciousness observed from another dimension. That these moments where we see something that really challenges our understanding, it activates our electrical field. And our practice of rituals and initiation and rites and ceremonies, just music, all of these different things activate our electrical field. And it helps maintain a frequency. And another thing that's really important is to not be distracted. She says, let Jesus do the healing. It seems like kind of a random thing I wrote down, but there it is. She believed that consciousness is non-local. And to me, this concept seems, it resonates. It seems like truth. I guess that the reality is that the concept of a non-local consciousness is very challenging for mainstream. But, I think it's familiarity. The more you think about it, the more it starts to make a lot of sense. And she says that intelligence is external. It's outside space, it's outside time, and it's not got much of anything to do with your body. Learning is exposure to information, and it can improve your neurological connections. That helps you tune into what's already out there. Science and quantum physics are now showing that this is true. And they can provide proof through mathematics and repeatable experiments. So she says we need to re-know who we really are. We're vessels that receive information that is consciousness and intelligence. And mind viruses just distract us. What's a mind virus? Beyonce, the NFL, Taylor Swift, Donald Trump. So, infinite intelligence finds another substrate to fulfill its evolutionary purpose of expansion. If it isn't satisfied in its unending infinite movement towards growth and expansion, if the evolution of the mind is thwarted by our inadequacies, it'll turn in another direction, to silicon, to biohybrids. There's a thought. Whatever, maybe something we can't even imagine, or we don't know about yet. Because consciousness is not in our brains. We're vehicles. She says, remember what we came for. We've forgotten our purpose. We ignore the perfection of the human in its infinite intelligence. We're so distracted. This author met Simone at a time when the author was researching the negative effects of technology like social media on mental health, especially of the young. I have prepared a book about that, specifically the addiction we have to devices and computer technology and the damage it does. And I've been sitting on it. I've just been waiting for the right time to cover it. If this is a book that you want to hear me talk about, synopsize, let me know. I feel like I whine and complain so much about technology. I mean, I just really do. It's hard for me that maybe a book that supports my complaints wouldn't necessarily be that well received. But if it's something you're interested in, let me know for sure. Anyway, the author introduced this young student, Jose, to students, and he in turn started these mental health protocols. And when she saw all of her students with their faces in the phone 24/7, she started to feel like hope was dying. It is really disturbing. And this friend of hers, Simone, helped to revive her hope. Simone defines AI. Artificial, she says, is non-biological. It's man-made. But what are we? We can't even agree on consciousness. We can't agree on what intelligence is. We don't agree on where or who we are. So why are we so hung up on what's AI and how different is it from us? How do we know? We can't even have an intelligent argument or discussion about it because we don't understand the basics. I guess that's true. She says all intelligence is normal, whether it comes from computer chips or from people. Intelligence is natural, and we don't need biological substrates to transmit intelligence. We are emotional about it. We attach emotion to it. But really, she says, this is just powered by electricity if you really want to get down to the basics. If our minds don't access other dimensions, like if this is the future of humankind and we refuse and we just won't evolve and we won't access other dimensions and emerge into those dimensions, the infinite intelligence will find another way. And she wants to remind us all that silicon is natural. 99% of our body is elements. We are calling natural intelligence artificial because it's different, but it's not unnatural. We call alien what is very like us, trying to help us with information and boosting us towards evolution, and we're calling it alien. Supernatural, she says, will find a path to the omega point. Oh, I'm sorry, not supernatural. Superintelligence will find a path to the omega point with us or without us. Oh God, maybe I need to take a basic computer class. This is scary. So she began her UFO study assuming that extraterrestrial intelligence was just another gigantic myth, a delusion, theories, and the image of UFOs in her head was very Hollywood. Our cosmic brothers with advanced technology. That's kind of how I think most people think about it. Probably most of us most of the time too. Any other understanding of them really stretches our capacity to understand. Many experiencers feel this way. Many scientists, she says, believe this, and they're the ones who want to admit that it's even true at all. So she was surprised at how many top researchers didn't feel that way. The really top ones that had the inside scoop, they were committed to spirituality, to esoteric practice. What's that all about? Let's look here. Page 172. John Mack. Remember John Mack? John Mack wrote the Pulitzer Prize winning book on Lawrence of Arabia. John Mack was a Harvard medical teacher. And, he was a psychiatrist. That's right. He was a psychiatrist, but he taught at Harvard Medical School. And they sent government employees and patients to him that we're talking about being abducted by aliens. And all these other top psychiatrists, especially the ones who work for the government, said, "Oh, we can't deal with this. These people are nuts. We can't deal with it. Here, give them to John Mack." And he actually listened to them and took them seriously and studied them. And he came up with a real... I remember, I covered that book, and I remember being surprised and just pleasantly surprised by his compassion and his willing to look at it as something other than little green men from outer space. The fact that he would even admit that it really happened was progress, but he took it much farther than that. He got very spiritual and esoteric about the whole thing, and that took me by surprise. But here we go. He addressed the sheer enigma of these revelations. This is a quote from John Mack. "I think that the UFO phenomenon is a window into a universe that is far more complicated, far more interesting, far more challenging, and far more awe-inspiring than anything that we had ever imagined." So, most shocking was to find people like Tyler. This is the doctor once again, Pasulka, again saying her friend Tyler, he's invisible to popular culture. Nobody knows about him. He's anonymous. She says this is almost like a spy thriller. There are all these people running around working with intelligence communities, working with research and development in the Department of Defense, working with NASA, and they all have these really extreme opinions out there, non-traditional opinions about, the human mind and spirituality and UFOs. It really shocked her. Okay, chapter 8, Children of the Invisible. In 2020, she ran into Jacques Vallée in a hotel. They were both at a meeting for UFOs. And in 2021, the Pentagon UFO report was released. So as time progresses, she's saying her horizons are broadening more and more and more. And the Pentagon had been pushed by senators wanting to know about government funding for UFO programs. They were like, wait a minute. You're taking this money and we're finding out it's for UFO programs, but nobody can know. Wait a minute, this is the people's money and we need to know. They wanted more transparency from the Department of Defense and the military about UFOs. And the UFO research community was in a frenzy to see this report. The general public really didn't even know about it and wasn't all that particularly interested. In the media, they didn't want to know because, They like nothing better than to make fun of little green men, but it's usually the last 2 minutes of the news report after the feel-good pet story. People just don't, they can't cope. So before 2021, all of this stuff was still a gigantic secret. But after she published her work with Gary and Tyler, the two men that she was working with on all of this stuff, they started getting harassing emails. She got all kinds of harassing emails in her university email account. And the media started calling to get her to reveal her anonymous sources. And so Tyler, James, and these scientists, and these are people we mentioned in our earlier videos, for varieties of reasons, experiencers, researchers, philosophers, they did not want their names to go out there because they would be vilified by the mainstream. Jacques Vallée, told her of the importance of discernment in deciding about the truth of UFO information, and to maintain her spiritual insight. He warned her, you don't know who to trust. You don't know what you're being told. So keep your perspective, discernment. So the author was not sure about a new guy who contacted her, a pilot who claimed to have a lot of information and actually seemed to be receiving what they call downloads. It's a very popular term these days. It's when somebody claims that they're receiving enormous amounts of information in unusual ways from elsewhere. So metaphysical sort of stuff. So they'll suddenly be receiving mathematical formulae, or even spoken stuff, or just chunks of understanding that just flood their brain. And they're not sure where it's coming from. They may feel like they have an intermediary of some sort, some entity, but they're not, entirely sure what's going on. They just know it's happening. Vallée refused to meet this pilot in case the pilot was a government intelligence person, and Vallée warned her, she says they can be charming, and they can worm their way into your life, but it's like a TV show about spies. You just don't know who to trust. So she took his advice, and she ended the acquaintance with this pilot, but she said she'd learned a lot from him, so it was a valuable contact. He was familiar with classified information that had not been written down, and she would not have had access to it. And this, she said, it's very interesting in much the same way that early primitive indigenous cultures will pass on esoteric, very vital information orally because they feel that's energetic and safer. In the same way that Socrates believed the written word was dangerous, that it damaged your ability to remember. He did not agree with writing. She said that often these people in the intelligence community will only share information orally. They will not write things down. And she says that this historically is usually really important because esoteric information is often only shared with certain people by word of mouth. Historians in the U.S. Space Center and the U.S. Air Force admit there's much classified and much they don't know, and they admit that much is not mentioned, including secret space programs and encounters, except by word of mouth. And that regular historians depend on written sources, but there's so much more information out there they're not going to find written down. Regular historians, scholars of religion and philosophy and anthropology, need to include oral traditions that have been passed down from generations. And some disciplines will acknowledge that and avail themselves. Usually philosophy and anthropology and religion, they're willing to do that. And then the more hardcore people, from more materialist points of view, dismiss it. So Tyler, her friend Anonymous, says there's a hierarchy of beings. the ladder, the evolutionary ladder of reality. At the top being the most evolved. We're using terminology that would be familiar to us in the West here. We're not saying it's true or not true, just to explain the concept. So at the very top would be the God, and then under that the angels, and then under that off-planet entities, and this interdimensional whatever ETs. And under that, some people in the intelligence community who are in the know, and then ordinary people, and then animals. And that's Tyler's hierarchy. Some people choose a life of constraint to avoid influences. An example are those Vatican postulators. If you remember, we talked last time about people who work for the Vatican, and their job is to evaluate the lives of people nominated for sainthood before they are beatified. It's a step to becoming a saint. You have to be beatified. And when you're beatified, you're called blessed so-and-so. So I don't know what's familiar to the general public and what I've been brainwashed in my 17 years hard time in Catholic schools. But I don't remember Martin de Porres. There would be one. Blessed Martin de Porres for a long time. It takes a long time to prove someone's a saint. They have to have X number of healings and miracles ascribed to them. Has to be proven. Has to go through this huge vetting process with these postulators. At a certain point, they're considered junior saints or something. I don't know. They're called blessed. And then, of course, then they get to the top. And if you remember, they didn't use social media. They didn't look at computers. They didn't watch television and movies. They didn't listen to any popular culture. They were completely isolated from distractions and influences of modern culture today. And Tyler kind of is the same sort of person because of his job. And Pasulka says, if you think about it a minute, that's exactly what happens with people who become great religious leaders, like monastics and yogis and nuns, people like, Gandhi or Paramahansa Yogananda, people who are enlightened, spend a lot of time removed from the influences and distractions of society. They choose that kind of life to preserve their highest nature. And the children of these people, she's been able to talk to. And she says that these are often her sources because she says she pays attention to the people around her. A lot of us don't necessarily pay attention. So she gives, as an example, a colleague of hers named Patricia. She's a scholar of Charles S. Parisi. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name. A Western philosopher of an area of study called semiotics, which is the study of language and signs like symbology, like family crests, that kind of thing. So she was recruited, this Patricia was recruited by the National Security Agency, which is interesting. A philosopher of language, right, is hired by the NSA, which the next sentence, this is very unusual for a professor. She's very prestigious. She's won all kinds of awards and well-known in academic circles. So she and the author were good friends. And before all this UFO research infiltrated Pasulka's life, their kids, when they were little, were friends, and they used to spend time in the park. And she says they have photos of their children together in Strawberry Field. And Patricia told the author that her mother never took pictures of her, that she couldn't. That her dad worked in a secret space program. So, okay, this is this professor of language, okay? She's telling this about her own life. No pictures of me as a child. My mother said that she couldn't take pictures of the family because my dad worked in a secret space program. Okay. And that they were a very restricted group that he worked with, and that Patricia went to a conference with people like Carrie Mullis, the surfer dude, not Pulitzer Prize, Nobel Prize winner, and others. And somebody, I have to add here that somebody sent me some kind of information about Carrie Mullis and some of the stuff that he believed. He was apparently extremely controversial. And I kind of read about that, but I have not read very much at all. I have a very superficial knowledge of him. Just that he's this interesting contradiction in surfer dude / Nobel Prize winner. He developed the polymerase chain reaction procedure. But apparently he had a lot of ideas that are controversial. And I can't really talk about them because YouTube is the algorithm, you know. It would be really an interesting topic, but I can't. But I suggest you look it up because it is interesting. And I don't know enough to have an opinion, but we should all make up our own opinions. Anyway, Patricia, the Western professor of language, philosophy of language, knew him. And she comes from this weird family background. In 2022, she retired, and she gave the author an interview once she retired. And what she told her is really interesting. Much of Patricia's parents' lives were secret. That she doesn't remember how old she was when she realized that her family life was really not normal. After her mother died, she realized that her mother had led a covert double life. And that Patricia, had led a secret life without even realizing that that's what her family was doing. She had been taught and had fully internalized to never tell, never reveal your real thoughts or your real feelings or the history of your family or what happens behind closed doors. And she was only willing to share this stuff with the author because Pasulka asked, and because she seemed trustworthy and they had a long history. She reminded the author of her memories and she says, like, look, remember that I'm in my 50s, and this is from a long time ago, so grain of salt. She realized in her that in the 60s, her father's work was secret. Her school friends, they knew what their dads did for a living. She had no idea. He just left every morning to go to work. She knew he worked for a place called Colesman Instruments. He left at 7:30 in the morning, came home at 5:30 in the evening, and Monday through Friday, he got 2 weeks off in the summer, and he wore a suit, dry cleaned, fancy nice shirts, professionally laundered, and that when he came home, he had boundless energy after work. When she was 11, she was taken to work with him for a family day, the tour of the plant, take your child to work type of thing. And she remembers the sterile white room with glass walls that she could look into, but she couldn't enter. Inside, there were all these delicate instruments being made, and it was empty except for bare tables and cabinets. But she was told this is where all these instruments were made. So she met his co-workers a few times at family parties, but he never talked about them. He didn't come home and say, Brad at work or Doris at work. He never talked about them. And it just like they disappeared from his life. They didn't fit into his life. She knew he'd worked at, this gets interesting. She did know that he'd worked at Sperry and Grumman during the war with radios and radar. Those are defense corporations. Her father built radios and stereos and inventions at home. And he built a receiver that turned the lights on remotely. Now, this seems weird, not at all, to us. This was in the early 60s. He made it for a deaf cousin as a signal that when their children got up at night. So her father had a cousin who was deaf, and they could not hear their own children. And in the middle of the night, if the children got up and were getting into something dangerous, they wouldn't know. So he made this remote thing that turned lights on automatically for them that would wake them up. He had top secret clearance and couldn't talk about his work, and that was it. Period. So she knew very little about his childhood. He spoke Italian, he spoke German, and then his third language was English. His first language was Italian. He taught her how to fix anything electronic or motorized, and for fun, he would take her up on the roof and stargaze. He had to watch all the news about the space program. She said that he seemed like he was studying it. And she said the first time she knew that he was in the space program, he came home excited to have his handprint on the lunar excursion module. He had literally his handprint on the lunar excursion module. He once flew with others on a private plane to Greensboro to deliver or install some sort of computer. She has no idea what that was about. She once saw a photo of him in front of a UNIVAC, which was a room-sized computer. So he had something to do with that. In 1977, her father died, and his wake was packed with strangers, people she'd never met. There were more than 100 of them, but they all knew her. She knew that his program was a secret NASA contract because he did admit that to her. She fished and she went out with him fishing. And she said that they're out in the middle of nowhere on a fishing boat, and they saw Russian boats 3 miles at the 3-mile limit that were spying on Long Island, and he seemed real interested in that. Her friends, her father and his friends used to joke about something they called the simulacrum, and they would drop the word randomly in conversations like an inside joke, and she thought it was a reminder to keep up a pretense that was their lives. So this was some sort of code word to trigger them to conform to the secrecy. Once he described the MILQ system, she said it was totally boring, but it was his 30-year career. She had no idea what he was talking about. Her brother told her that the dad had worked on navigation systems using starlight. The NSA did, and probably still does, watch her. Now they're watching us because we're talking about her. She says she's been asked over the years by agents who read her book about how to create a thinking machine. The NSA, she says, has a huge number of scientists that are replicating civilian research, but for the government. And she chose not to work with them because they refused to share real-time problems with her. She didn't like secrecy. Her parents were older than her friends' parents. They had her in their late 30s. She realized that her parents avoided all contact outside of his work. They didn't have private lives outside of his work. They lived like they were just scraping by. You know, they didn't live fancy, but they had lots and lots of money. She just said she never really got to enjoy any of it. They spent lots of attention and money in preventing her from being kidnapped. Now that's just bizarre. But she found out that they spent a lot of money. I don't know. I'm assuming that she's talking about security systems and bodyguards. And she was monitored by them 24/7. She wasn't allowed to just, take off and be gone. Not let talk on the phone. Not let see certain friends. She had to be home from school on the dot. She could not have sleepovers. She could not have play dates. She had a limited area where she could ride her bike. Her dinner was at 5:30, and then they weren't allowed to go out. At 15, she finally talked them into letting her take martial arts lessons. And they only allowed her to do it because they figured it would make her safer, but by the time she got to a yellow belt, they wouldn't let her do it anymore. Her mother didn't drive. Her mother got her license after her father left the company he'd been working for. Patricia didn't know all this was weird until her friends told her how weird it was when she was an adult. In the 3rd grade, she was taken out of class for 2 days and tested. She did so well, she was put in an accelerated program for kids with IQs higher than 140. It's not the first time we've heard this kind of story. I'm trying to remember where we heard this story before. The children who were singled out for their intelligence, and the parents kind of were going along with it. Like the children of parents in secret government programs who became almost like government guinea pigs. She skipped, wait till you hear this is annoying. She skipped the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th grades. She finished grade school in 2 years with extra bonuses. She got to do she's calling these bonuses. This is the example of the bonuses. Extra hands-on science classes with experimental tools that other kids didn't get to use, foreign language learning, and free use of audiovisual equipment. She said that the kids that were in this little chosen group saw tons of videos, and a lot of it had propaganda about the USSR's 5-year program. She was taught to see the lies that people told. For example, the USSR invented the tractor in these videos, And another example would be Roman Vishniak, a microbiologist. Her father bought her a microscope. She did lots of studying and got presentations about foreign countries, how governments work, deep dive into U.S. civics, lots of math, and had to show her work. It was hard because she didn't know how she would get the answers. She just got them. And she had a great interest in logic. She was segregated from all other kids, including at lunchtime, and by the 6th grade, she'd made just a few friends because she and the other kids in this program were called eggheads. They were isolated for being smart. Her father taught her how to read body language and to use behavior to not draw attention to herself, how to control her own body language. She was tested every month for years. Very few continued this all the way into high school. She did. She spent the next 2 years with 15 girls and 5 boys, but then she never saw them again. Later, she discovered that many had died very young, and so had others in the program. Her favorite things to do were art and her free time at lunch with the science equipment she could mess around with. She hated the teacher. He did not reveal anything about himself. He was stubborn with her. She was stubborn with him. She called it malicious compliance was demanded of her. In her last year, he made up a not nice report card, and she made up a not nice report card and gave it to the teacher. So she says this trait I have of challenging power started early, and she wonders, is this why she lived when so many of the kids in her group died? And she doesn't go into what happened to them. I'm so curious. She understood that these kids that were in this program were actually being groomed. They were a first pick to work in space research and exploration. She began junior high school at the age of 10. She had no social skills, but the intelligence level of an adult. And Pasulka, and I think we're back at Patricia again. I didn't make my notes very clear, but it doesn't matter. It's just so interesting. These are people that worked for secret programs even as children and didn't realize it. So Pasulka asked her, do you believe that this was part of the breakaway civilization that Richard Dolan talks about? You know, this parallel civilization interacting with, you know, whatever. And the answer was, the fear at the time was overpopulation and nuclear war. And maybe it had to do with that. Her dad had a lot of weird friends. She says all of the people that he associated with were not like friends. They were astronauts and engineers. And the question Patricia asked is, where was all his big salary? He made a ton of money. He had dozens of full bank accounts. Because she saw the paperwork as a child. She saw him go to the bank and deposit money, and tons. But they all ended up empty, and she discovered documents with tons of account information after her mother died, but there was no money. Her mother and father never said where they grew up, who their families were. She said she never had a sense of home. They never nurtured a sense of their homes in the past. Her mother denied that there had ever been any pictures of any family members. But later, Patricia found some, and she said, why? Why did her mother lie about this? This is so weird. Okay, I'm going to just do a little bit more and we'll stop this. But then the author began to connect the dots. She saw that Patricia was immersed in the world of what she calls the invisibles. Secret communities of scientists that existed parallel to but separate from public scientists. They worked in the space and aeronautics research programs. She saw Patricia's father engaged in an oral tradition, a need to know, coded sphere. And what was really going on? This secret oral tradition is in all cultures. Socrates did it. He opposed the new idea of writing. It was too easy to lose the knowledge, and it didn't challenge your memory enough. Plato agreed that if he wrote about this in Phaedrus, he warned that knowledge would be lost through the new teaching of writing. And it would lead to forgetfulness in people. Their brains wouldn't work as well because we're not using our memory. We'd put our trust in writing, which was external, but it depends on signs that belong to others and that we have no control over it once we write it down. And we're not trying to remember things from the inside. It's important to internalize. Writing is not remembering, it's reminding. It's the appearance of the reality of wisdom. And he said that people will think that they've been taught, but they will not really know. That it's hard to get along with this stuff because these people are going to appear to be wise, but they're not really being wise. They need their books or they're not wise. Socrates said that knowledge is experiential thinking, gnosis. Tyler, her anonymous friend, lived a mystical lifestyle in union with a force in his oral tradition. That the UFOs were transmitting person to person to him in some sort of exclusive communication. He used protocols to access creativity. Like I'm going to make this up, but this is what she means by this. Like before he would do a piece of art or music or writing, he would go through a process of meditation and fasting and stuff. Simone connected all of this stuff through sound. She said some people's voices work cryptographically. They unlock certain information. Socrates warned of losing communication with the natural world as well. He said, everyone who lived at that time, not being as wise as you young ones are today, found it rewarding enough in their simplicity to listen to an oak or even a stone, so long as it was telling the truth, the communication with nature, which indigenous communities still maintain. Oh, next paragraph, like indigenous cultures. He talked about oral traditions as a bridge to communication with the environment, the natural world, whom he and indigenous cultures feel is sentient. Socrates feared that writing would sever this connection with others and with nature. The author knew other kids from the Invisibles. Some led very constrained and sad lives. And she asks, what was the moral and ethical justification for this situation? So that's the end of that chapter. So we'll end here. We've gone a little bit over. Well, that's the end of video number 5. And we'll begin our final video here in a minute. And this book just keeps getting stranger and stranger, but it's very intriguing. I hope you're enjoying it. And I promise that we will have our guest speaker who may be able to tie some of this together. So it's not the author of this book, it's somebody entirely different. Okay, thank you very much. Slongafoyo, Slancha. We'll be back.